I hate to say this, but Morrisons is killing us softly. Not in terms of health, in terms of trust and money. You notice it at the till. Ordinary items cost more than you remember. Packs that once felt generous now feel thin. What used to be 500 grams quietly becomes 450. Same shelf, same packaging, same price, less food. And behind the friendly smiles and warm bakery lights, the working environment tells a different story. Staff under pressure, pay disputes simmering in the background, a family image held together by people carrying far more strain than the branding suggests. None of this is loud. That's why it works. We all love Morrisons. For me and for many of you, it's more than a supermarket. It's routine, familiarity, something that used to feel dependable. That's exactly why we can't look away. The only way to protect the Morrisons we remember is to raise our awareness. In this video, I'll show you what's really happening behind the shelves. Buckle up, these are truths they'd rather you never find out. Why your Morrisons shop costs more. You don't realise Morrisons is expensive while you're shopping. You realise it after. When you get home, when the bags are unpacked, when you look at what's actually on the table and feel that quiet sinking irritation. This cost more than it should have. Not because you were careless, not because you bought luxuries, but because something doesn't add up. That feeling isn't imagined, it's structural. Take a step back from individual prices and look at the basket. In September 2025, Consumer Group, which compared the cost of a typical large grocery shop across major UK supermarkets. Asda, consistently one of the cheapest, came out at £465.66, the same basket at Morrisons, even with a more card averaged £493.60. Without the loyalty card, it rose to $504.46. That's a gap of $28 to $35 for the same type of shop. Not for better quality, not for premium brands, just for choosing Morrisons. That difference doesn't scream at you on the shelf. It whispers. A few pence more on bread, slightly higher prices on meat, everyday cupboard items sitting just above where your instincts expect them to be. No single item feels outrageous. That's exactly why it works. You don't notice the drain until it's already happened. This is where Morrisons becomes infuriating. It trades heavily on the idea that it's fair, familiar, reasonable. Prices feel about right as you move through the aisles, and the yellow stickers reinforce that comfort. But the maths doesn't care about comfort. Across a full shop, Morrisons regularly loses on value, not by pounds on one item, but by dozens of small losses stacked neatly on top of each other. Loyalty pricing makes this worse, not better. You're told that scanning your card is the key to saving money, that you're being rewarded for sticking with the brand. But even after jumping through those hoops, the basket still comes out higher than cheaper competitors. The loyalty card doesn't protect you from overpaying, it just softens the blow enough to stop you walking away. You think you've won something when in reality you've just paid slightly less than you otherwise would have. And this is where frustration turns into anger, because Morrisons knows people don't shop with spreadsheets. People shop tired, people shop after work, people shop with budgets already stretched thin. They make quick judgments, trust familiar brands, and assume a supermarket that presents itself as grounded and community-focused wouldn't quietly take advantage of that trust. But Morrisons does. Repeatedly. What makes this sting is the emotional contract. Morrisons isn't Aldi. It isn't pretending to be ruthless and stripped back. It wraps itself in British flags, warm lighting, and talk of farmers and families. That image creates an expectation of fairness. When the prices don't match that expectation, the disappointment cuts deeper. You don't just feel overcharged, you feel misled. And instead of blaming the system, people blame themselves. Maybe prices have gone up everywhere. Maybe this is just how things are now. Maybe I misremember what food costs. That quiet self-doubt is incredibly useful to supermarkets. It keeps customers from asking harder questions. It keeps them coming back. But when you compare Morrisons directly with more affordable options, the story changes. This isn't just inflation, it's positioning. Morrisons has chosen to sit higher on the basket while still marketing itself as everyday value. That gap between image and reality is where the trust starts to erode. And when supermarkets reach the limit of how much they can extract through basket pricing alone, they don't stop. They look for subtler ways to protect margins. They stop raising prices loudly. They start changing something else. Shrinkflation. Paying more, getting less. I'm going to be honest with you, this one got under my skin because it's the kind of thing you only notice after it's already happened. Not in the shop, not at the till. But later, when you're at home and something feels off. Food runs out quicker than it used to. Dinners don't stretch. You open a pack and think, wasn't there more than this last time? And at first, you blame yourself. Maybe I'm imagining it. Maybe portions are bigger. Maybe I'm misremembering. I went through that exact cycle, then I checked. At Morrisons, shrinkflation isn't a theory, it's visible. In late 2025, the quality street tub on Morrisons shelves quietly changed. Same branding, same position, but the weight dropped from 600 grams to 550 grams. At the same time, the price went up from $6 to $7. When you do the maths, that's a 27% increase per 100 grams. Not because the chocolate suddenly got better, not because customers asked for smaller tubs, just because they could get away with it. That was the moment I stopped giving them the benefit of the doubt. There was no clear warning, no big label saying smaller pack, no honest sign explaining the change. The information was there, technically buried in small print, but not where normal people look. Morrisons didn't raise the price and explain why. They changed the rules quietly and waited for shoppers like us to keep trusting our habits. And we did, because that's how shrinkflation works. You don't stand in the aisle comparing old weights in your head. You recognise the pack. You reach for it. You assume it's the same thing you bought last year. That assumption is exactly what they're counting on. I saw someone online describe it perfectly. I felt stupid when I realised. Not angry at first, just annoyed that it slipped past me. That feeling is familiar, isn't it? Not outrage. Just that dull frustration. The sense that you've been nudged backwards without being told. And this is where it really annoys me about Morrisons specifically. This isn't a bare-bones discounter. It doesn't sell itself as ruthless or ultra-calculated. It sells comfort, familiarity, straightforwardness, a place you don't need to watch too closely. That image lowers your guard and shrinkflation walks straight through it. If Morrisons needs to charge more, fine. Say it. Let people decide. That's honest. What isn't honest is shrinking products silently and pretending nothing has changed. That removes choice. You're still paying, but you're no longer buying what you think you are. And the knock-on effects are real. When packs get smaller, households don't suddenly eat less. I didn't. You don't. You just buy again sooner. You top up. You start looking for things that feel more filling for the money, cheaper options, heavier options, things that stretch. And those options are often more processed, more padded, more engineered to survive exactly this kind of pressure. That's the part people don't talk about enough. Shrinkflation doesn't just change quantities, it changes behaviour. It pushes ordinary shoppers quietly toward different food choices, not because they want to, but because they're boxed in by price and size. Over time, you adapt. You expect less. You stop being surprised when packs feel lighter. You stop questioning it. That's the real damage. Not one smaller tub, but the slow resetting of what we accept as normal. Once I saw the numbers, I couldn't unsee them. That lighter pack wasn't my imagination. The cupboard emptying faster wasn't bad planning, it was deliberate. And when cost pressure starts steering what we buy next, when shrinking portions push us toward different kinds of food altogether, the question stops being about value and becomes something more uncomfortable. What does this pressure do to what we're actually eating week after week? When Morrisons shapes your diet. I'll be frank, what happens inside a Morrisons store affects what ends up on your plate far more than most people realise. When prices stay tight and packs get smaller, Morrisons doesn't just sell food, it quietly shapes diets. Not through a single bad product and not through one reckless choice, but through steady pressure. You go in looking for ordinary meals. You come out with things that are easier, cheaper per calorie and more processed than you planned. I've done it myself. Most people have. At Morrisons, the shelves that grow fastest under pressure are not the fresh counters at the edge of the store. They're the middle aisles, long shelf life, ready to heat, family favourites, food that promises convenience and value when time, energy and money are running low. That shift matters because over time, it changes what becomes normal. Here's the clinical reality stripped of drama. In the UK today, more than half of the calories people consume come from ultra-processed foods. These are foods that go far beyond simple cooking. They're built from refined ingredients, oils, starches, flavourings and additives designed to last longer, taste stronger and cost less to produce. Large, well-established studies consistently show that diets higher in these foods are associated with higher risks of heart disease, type 2 diabetes, obesity, and poorer mental health. Not overnight, not from one shop, from repetition. This isn't about blame, it's about environment. Morrisons still presents itself as traditional and grounded. Fresh bakery smells, British sourcing language, a sense that this is a proper supermarket. That image encourages trust, and trust lowers defences. You don't scrutinise every ingredient list when you believe the store broadly has your interests at heart. You assume balance is built in, but balance doesn't survive cost pressure automatically. When shrinkflation and rising prices squeeze households, appetite doesn't shrink with it. People compensate. They buy replacements sooner. They choose foods that feel more filling for the money. And in a Morrisons aisle, more filling often means more processed. Not because people want that outcome, but because those products are designed to win under exactly these conditions. I remember standing there myself looking at two options. One simpler, one more processed. The processed one was cheaper, heavier, and promised to stretch further. I knew which one was better in theory. I also knew which one would get me through the week. That's not ignorance. That's pressure doing its job. From a health point of view, this pattern is worrying because it's quiet. Diets heavy in ultra-processed food tend to be higher in salt, sugar, and unhealthy fats and lower in fibre and essential nutrients. Over time, that combination strains the heart, disrupts blood sugar control, affects digestion, and even influences mood and energy levels. People often attribute those changes to aging or stress without realising how much daily food choices contribute. What makes Morrisons relevant here is not that it's uniquely bad, it's that it feels safe. When a supermarket with a wholesome reputation drifts toward a heavier reliance on processed food under cost pressure, customers follow without noticing. The shift doesn't feel like a downgrade, it feels like adapting. That's how habits change, not with a warning sign, with small compromises that make sense in the moment. A ready option here, a shortcut there. Soon enough, those choices stop feeling temporary. They become routine. I don't believe Morrisons wakes up trying to damage anyone's health, but I do believe that when price pressure, shrinking portions and processed convenience collide inside a trusted brand, the health impact gets hidden. People assume the system will nudge them towards something reasonable. Right now, that nudge is inconsistent at best. This isn't about fear, it's about seeing clearly. Because once you understand how Morrisons' environment shapes everyday eating under pressure, you start looking for guidance elsewhere. You start leaning harder on labels, claims, and reassuring words to help you choose better. And that's where the next problem begins. If we're relying on packaging to protect our health, how much faith should we really place in what those labels are telling us? When Morrisons' labels stop helping. There comes a point where price pressure and health pressure stop being the main issue and trust takes over. You're standing in front of the shelf, tired, rushed, trying to make a half-decent choice. You don't have time to analyse everything, so you lean on the words: British, responsible, quality. You trust the label to guide you. That trust is exactly what Morrisons trades on. Let's be clear, supermarket labels are not neutral. They are marketing tools designed to reassure first and explain later. When money is tight and portions are shrinking, those words become shortcuts. Morrisons knows this, and it uses that knowledge. A real example makes this impossible to ignore. Morrisons once sold chicken labelled as British wrapped in familiar national language, while the seasoning on the same product was described as non-EU salt and pepper. Customers noticed, social media noticed. Morrisons apologised and quietly changed the wording. The product wasn't illegal, but it was misleading enough to spark backlash, and that's the point. The line wasn't crossed until people complained. That wasn't a typo, that was branding instinct meeting reality. And it tells you something important about how trust actually works here. Morrisons will stretch language right up to the point where customers push back, not beyond, just up to it. This pattern shows up all over the store. Morrisons leans heavily on phrases like responsibly sourced and quality assured. They sound solid, but they explain almost nothing. No clear standards, no clear accountability. Just enough warmth to stop you asking questions. Under pressure, most shoppers don't have the time or energy to decode that, and Morrisons knows it. What frustrates me is how responsibility quietly gets shifted onto the customer. If something feels unclear, you should have read more closely. If expectations aren't met, you misunderstood the wording. The supermarket keeps its comforting tone, and the burden of interpretation lands on you. That's not fair, especially when people are already stretched thin. I'll say what I've been holding back. I'm tired of standing in a Morrisons aisle reading words that sound reassuring but don't actually tell me anything useful. I'm tired of being nudged into trust instead of being given clarity. And I'm tired of supermarkets acting surprised when customers feel misled, as if confusion just appears on its own. Because this isn't confusion, it's design. Morrisons has built its reputation on familiarity and decency. That makes vague language more damaging here than elsewhere. When a hard discount chain uses foggy wording, you expect it. When Morrisons does it, it feels like a breach of an unwritten agreement. And once that trust cracks, everything else comes into question. Prices, portions, food quality. You start wondering who actually absorbs the cost when pressure builds, and the brand still needs to look warm and friendly. Because if the labels aren't telling the full story and customers are already paying more and eating differently, then the next place to look isn't the packet. It's the people behind the counter and what they're being asked to carry, so Morrisons can keep smiling. The people paying the price. From our customer side, Morrisons still looks calm. Shelves stocked, lights warm, staff smiling as they scan your shopping. But the pressure we've been talking about doesn't disappear when it leaves the till. It lands somewhere else. And at Morrisons, it lands on the people keeping the place running. Let's talk numbers, because this isn't about vibes. In April 2025, Morrisons' hourly pay for many shop floor workers rose largely because the national living wage increased, not because the company chose to lead. Union statements at the time were blunt. A large share of Morrisons' staff were effectively being paid at or just above the legal minimum. When the government raises the floor, Morrisons follows. When it doesn't, wages sit still. That's not generosity, that's compliance. Then there's the pension dispute. In 2024, around 1,000 Morrisons warehouse workers took strike action after proposed changes to pension contributions that unions said would cost some staff up to $500 a year. Management framed it as a necessary saving. Unite estimated the company was looking to save around $10 million annually. For the business, it was a line on a spreadsheet. For workers, it was retirement money. This isn't ancient history, this is recent, and it matters. On top of that sits the long-running equal pay case, where predominantly female shop workers argue they are paid less than warehouse staff for work of equal value. The legal process has dragged on for years, buried in job evaluations and tribunal stages. No dramatic headlines, just thousands of people turning up to work month after month knowing the argument about what their labour is worth still isn't settled. One Morrisons employee summed it up in a way that stuck with me. You're expected to smile and keep things moving even when you're exhausted. Customers don't see the pressure, but it's there, every shift. That's the reality behind the branding. Morrisons likes to call itself a family supermarket. That language matters, because when you use it, people assume a certain standard of care. Families don't run on minimums. Families don't quietly shave pensions. Families don't drag equal pay arguments out until everyone is too tired to keep fighting. What makes this harder to swallow is how invisible it all is. Most customers have no idea these disputes exist unless there's a strike outside the store. Day to day, the pressure stays hidden. Staff absorb it. They work faster, cover more ground, pick up extra shifts, keep smiling. The shopping experience stays smooth, and the cost of that smoothness is quietly transferred onto their bodies and their futures. And let's be honest about what's happening here. Morrisons isn't alone in this behaviour, but it leans on a friendlier image than most. When a no-frills discounter squeezes, labour, people expect it. When a supermarket built on warmth and familiarity does the same, it feels like something has gone badly wrong. This isn't about demonising workers or pretending every manager is heartless. It's about acknowledging a system where pressure flows downhill. Prices get harder to raise, portions get smaller, labels get vaguer, and the final buffer becomes the people who can't pass that pressure on. The most uncomfortable part is how normal it's become. Low pay is framed as competitive, pension cuts framed as necessary, long legal battles framed as process. Each word softens the reality just enough to keep things moving. So, when you hear about dispute strikes or quiet dissatisfaction inside Morrisons, don't dismiss it as background noise. It's part of the same story you see on the shelf and on the receipt. The cost hasn't vanished, it's just being carried by someone else. And when the same people keep carrying it year after year, the question stops being about individual decisions inside the store. It becomes about who set this system up in the first place and who it was really designed to protect. What really changed at Morrisons? Have you figured out the hidden engine behind all above acts? In fact, what's been happening at Morrisons didn't start with shoppers or staff suddenly doing something wrong. It didn't even start with food. It started with ownership. Back in 2021, Morrisons stopped being a public company and was taken over by private equity. You weren't asked. You weren't told it would change your weekly shop. And to be fair, nothing looked different at first. Same stores, same signs, same smell of bread near the entrance. That's how these things work. The change doesn't show up on day one. But something important did change. When a company is bought using a lot of borrowed money, it doesn't just belong to the people running the stores anymore. It belongs to the debt. And debt has a personality. It's impatient. It needs paying regularly. Morrisons came out of that takeover carrying billions of pounds in debt. You don't feel that when you walk in, but the business feels it every single day. Interest payments don't wait. They don't care about loyalty or tradition. They just need cash. So the question quietly becomes, where does that money come from? Not from one big dramatic cut, from lots of small careful ones. Wages that stick close to the legal minimum, pensions that suddenly need reviewing, products that change just enough to protect margins, language on packaging that gets warmer as the pressure underneath gets colder. None of it shocking on its own. That's the trick. By 2023, Morrisons' parent company had reported losses of over £1 billion, while total debt sat somewhere around 8 to 9 billion. Those numbers don't sit in a report and stay there. They push their way into decisions. And when interest rates rise, that push gets harder. Here's the part that hurts a bit. Once you see this earlier, things start making sense. Why staff always seem stretched, why pay rises lag behind the cost of living, why everything feels tighter, less generous, more transactional than it used to. It's not because the people in the stores stopped caring. It's because the system above them changed. And I keep coming back to this question because it's hard to ignore. When a supermarket has to send hundreds of millions out the door just to service debt, who is it really working for the customer, trying to make a budget stretch? The worker trying to get through a long shift, or the financial structure sitting quietly above both of them? Morrisons still talks like a family supermarket. That's important, because when things get financially tight, warmth becomes an asset. Familiarity keeps people coming back. A calm, friendly surface stops you asking uncomfortable questions. The shop looks the same, so you assume the values are the same. But if you've been shopping there long enough, you can feel the difference. Not in one big moment, in lots of small ones. A sense that goodwill is being used up faster than it's being rebuilt, that the system is asking for a little more patience, a little more understanding, a little more flexibility, always from the same people. No one explains this openly. There's no sign saying things are different now. You're just expected to adapt, to accept that this is how it is, to keep trusting. That's the painful bit for me. Not that Morrisons changed hands, but that the consequences travel downward while responsibility feels like it's floating somewhere just out of reach. So when you notice prices creeping portions, shrinking staff looking tired, and labels doing more comforting than explaining, it's worth stopping for a second. Not to blame anyone in front of you, but to ask a quiet question. If this is the system Morrisons now operates under, who is it really designed to protect? And how long can that pressure keep being absorbed before something finally gives? Shopping in Morrisons with open eyes. Let's bring this back to something quieter, because after everything you've seen, shouting won't help. Understanding will. This video isn't telling you to panic. It isn't telling you to stop shopping somewhere tomorrow morning. And it's definitely not telling you to feel guilty for doing what most of us do, trying to get through the week without thinking too hard about every single decision. That's not failure, that's being human. The real risk isn't Morrisons itself, it's shopping on autopilot. Systems like this don't rely on people being stupid, they rely on people being tired, on habits doing the work instead of attention. When you shop the same way every week in the same place under the same pressure, small changes slip through. A pack gets lighter, a label sounds warmer than it should, a quick fix ends up in the trolley more often than you planned. None of it feels dramatic. That's why it works. So protecting yourself doesn't mean turning shopping into a battle. It means slowing it down just enough to stay in control. I've found it starts with looking at the unit price instead of the shelf price. Not every time, not obsessively. Just enough to notice when something familiar has quietly crept up. I pay more attention to pack sizes now, not because I'm suspicious of everything, but because I don't want my memory doing the maths for me. And when I see vague words on packaging responsible, quality, wholesome, I treat them as decoration, not instructions. The biggest shift though is noticing why something ends up in my basket. Is it because I chose it, or because it promised to make a hard week easier? That question alone changes a lot. Not always the outcome, but the awareness. This isn't about turning Morrisons into a villain or pretending it's your friend. It's a business operating under pressure like many others. Businesses don't deserve loyalty by default. People do. Trust should be conditional, renewed through behaviour, not assumed because a place feels familiar. I still shop there sometimes, but I shop differently now. Slower, more deliberately, with fewer assumptions. That small change has given me back a sense of control that I didn't realise I'd lost. And that's the point I want to leave you with. You can't change who owns a supermarket. You can't rewrite its balance sheet. You can't remove the pressure it's under. But you can decide how much of that pressure you absorb without noticing. The moment you stop shopping on autopilot, the moment you start paying quiet attention, the system loses its biggest advantage. If you've stayed with me this far, I want to say this clearly. Paying attention matters, especially when you shop at a place like Morrisons, where familiarity can make it easy to stop questioning. Awareness isn't about anger, it's about respect for your money, your health, and the people who work behind those tills every day. Morrisons will keep changing, ownership shifts, financial pressure comes and goes. That's reality. But what doesn't have to change is your ability to see clearly inside that environment. When you notice patterns, when you pause instead of rushing, when you stop assuming that familiar automatically means fair, you take back something important choice. This isn't about being perfect or never shopping there again. It's about shopping consciously. Small, calm decisions add up. Not blind loyalty, not panic, just clarity. And if enough people start shopping at Morrisons with open eyes, the system does respond. Slowly, quietly, but meaningfully.